All right, hello. Welcome to project stream number 11. I am about 10 minutes late to the beginning of this stream because I've been cursed with so many technical difficulties happening right before the beginning of the stream. This always seems to happen, but today it's been particularly bad. I've been battling with every app on my computer right now. And my phone. My phone's been giving me grief too. So I apologize for my tardiness. Thank you, anyone who has come to watch the stream live. If you're watching this in the future, apologies for my apology. Sorry for my apologetic nature. It's just a habit. And also Twitch logging me out and making me do two-factor authentication did not help. I don't remember turning that on, actually. I don't mind that it's on. I think it's good for security, but the fact that I have to do it when a stream is starting is a little ridiculous, considering I have not pressed log out, I think, ever on Twitch. It logs me out for me. So, and it's not, I'm not clearing cookies or something. So I don't know why that happens so frequently that I just am not in my account anymore. Okay, there are still some background things that refuse to be turned off in my in my task manager. I've been fighting with that too. It's like when your task manager isn't loading, that's a problem. I think part of it is because I simply have so many tabs open on my browser, which I usually do not do that to my computer because it's not strong enough. But I have a lot of tabs open right now because of what we're going to be doing today. They will be closed very soon, and so hopefully once that happens, my computer will chill the heck out. But until then, let me get started with what we're going to talk about today. So this is a kind of different project stream. I was going to do another journal, like journal POV. I figured out the camera issues that was causing me to have to be portrait mode last time. That's no longer necessary. It can be landscape. I figured it out. So I think next week will be another journal with me kind of thing, where you see me, like, setting up my journal, maybe even using a language that we talk about today. We'll see. But today, what we're doing is we're talking about journal conlangs. I'm talking about, because this is a project stream, it's like things I'm doing that other people might be interested in, other than Yesterlore. I will be talking about my personal struggles that I've had with journal conlangs, and hopefully find a solution to those problems, and hopefully be set up to build and make a conlang that I actually like for my journal. But in so doing, I hope to be able to sort of review different kinds of conlangs and different kinds of journal conlangs that people might do. So hopefully if you are wanting to conlang, or to journal in a conlang, or, this might be a helpful video for you to see for yourself. It's sort of like me talking through this issue might help you also think through this issue if you're interested in making a journal conlang. So, what is the issue? I guess I should start with what is a journal conlang, and then I'll talk about the issue. So a journaling conlang is a conlang so a constructed language, that is used in someone's journal. So it's a pretty self-explanatory, hopefully, name, but that can mean a lot of different things depending on what journaling means to the person. So the way I journal, it's sort of like a hybrid of like planner / like the planning side of bullet journaling, like actual journaling, like writing like your day or how you feel, processing stuff. I don't do as much as that as I would like, but I do it sometimes in theory and in practice even. And also like a commonplace book, like just sort of like a place where I write down things if I'm reading a book and I want to take notes on it, or like someone says something interesting and I want to note it down. So it's kind of just like a everything can go in here kind of thing, like things I need to remember, things I want to remember, things I'm taking notes on, my schedule, all in one place with a system that organizes it so I can know where to go to find things later. And that has worked for me pretty well. Been developing it. It's constantly in flux to suit like where I'm at in life and how busy I am and stuff. But it's worked out pretty well for me. But I guess the thing is, I don't enjoy journaling in English. It demotivates me from using the journal. That doesn't mean I never write in English in my journal. I write in English in my journal plenty. A lot of stuff I write is in English because that's the content of what I'm reading or writing, because I live in an English-speaking area predominantly. So English ends up being in here a lot. I also don't always like writing in the room. Now, if you've seen my Journal With Me video from a couple weeks ago, you saw that I currently mostly journal in Old English with a Tengwar script mode that I made up for Old English because I don't like Tolkien's very much. It's beautiful, but it's not practical for me. So I use my unique Old English Tengwar to write Old English. And that kind of works, but I'm going to talk about why I would prefer to write in a conlang, and sometimes do in certain situations. So what I did is, I'm going to talk about types of conlangs in a bit. I was going to do that first, but I think I'm not going to do that, because I would like to get to the part where I can close all these tabs very quickly. So I'm going to talk about my list first. And so I have a list, call it list. And this is a list of languages that I have used in my journal before, for different periods of time. So I forgot to put Hawaiian here, actually. I did use Hawaiian in my journal for a bit. I want to be inclusive. I did use it for a little bit when I was like working on my Hawaiian. Let me go to my Hawaiian keyboard real quick. There we go. I'm not going to write out the whole Olelo Hawaii right now because it's not going to fit. It's clear what I'm talking about. I have 3 columns. I have natural languages, I have conlangs, and then I have personal. Why do I have conlangs and personal separate when both conlangs and personal are all conlangs? Because these are conlangs that are not my sole creation. They're other people's conlangs for the most part, or conlangs that I was a part of a group making. And then these are conlangs I've made. These are not the only conlangs I've made for journaling. These are the ones that I actually put into practice for more than like one day. There are a lot more journal conlangs I've made through the years that I tried out for a day and got bored instantly. These are ones where I tried it for like maybe a week or more, and then stopped using it. Okay, so the natural languages. And then what are these what is accusative? Like, what is all this? So what I've just written is sort of the morphosyntactic alignment next to each one, just to showcase one aspect of why I want to journal in a conlang. All the natural languages that I'm comfortable enough-ish to journal in, I could journal in French, I just have never, ever had the impulse to do so. These are sort of in descending order of how frequently I've done it. Like English, I do it like just because for work stuff I have to write stuff down in English a lot, but usually my go-to is Old English. If not, then Italian. Then there have been long periods where I've just mostly done my journal in Spanish. Then there was a period when I was doing it in Hawaiian, a couple actually. And then this is Ancient Egyptian. I was reviewing hieroglyphic stuff and having fun trying to journal in Ancient Egyptian, but that did not work out for similar reasons to why many of these did not work out. So, and these all have nominative accusative morphosyntactic alignment. And if I'm not going to go too far into what that means today, but if you want a review of what different alignments mean, my Conlang With Me videos from like a year ago go into that in depth, especially the session 3, which is I think the first full episode that's recording is still up. There is a session 1 and 2 re-record of just like a short video summarizing what they were because I had technical difficulties back then, even worse than I do now. I didn't know how to use Twitch as well, and OBS, so those recordings are gone, but there's a video I made that's sort of like, hey, 1 and 2 don't exist, here's what happened, but there's a more in-depth review in episode 3 of everything, and that includes morphosyntactic alignment. But basically, you have, nominative accusative alignment in all of these languages pretty much. Some of them do interesting things with it, but for the most part, they're all nominative accusative alignment. And I'm not the biggest, nominative accusative alignment does not, slot. It's how I was raised speaking nominative accusative languages, but the way my brain conceptualizes things, it doesn't slot very well with nominative accusative. So that's why I turn to conlangs for that kind of thing. So, of course, all but one of these are nominative accusative of these conlangs that other people have made. So, Quenya and Sindarin, I have journaled in both. I like both a lot aesthetically. They're beautiful. It's fun to write in them, especially if I'm using Tengwar for them, or with Sindarin, sometimes I use Kirth instead, because Kirth was actually designed for Sindarin, even though the dwarves ended up using it more. But they're also accusative. And the bigger problem with these isn't the accusative syntax so much as the fact that, like with journaling in Ancient Egyptian, and sometimes even in Old English, but I just find the process of making compounds fun, so it's less of a problem with Old English, but it's annoying to have to either look up to see if anyone has come up with or make up a word for dishwasher in Elvish. That process of needing to do that whenever I need to write down a specific thing is annoying. It's not the end of the world, but it does make me less wanting. It makes me less interested in wanting to journal in the conlang, because I'm this is not efficient. It's the opposite of efficient, and I want the whole point. Okay, I will go over this when I go into my goals, but part of the point of journaling the way I do is to make my life easier, or make things easier to find and help with my memory issues. And having to go and search makes it less efficient, I do run into that problem with Old English, but at this point I've been using it for so long that I have mental, compounds for those kind of things. I have a way to say dishwasher in Old English. There isn't an authentic one, but I made one up a long time ago and have been using it for a long time. And so it's as natural as any other word to me when I journal in Old English versus a conlang. However, that is, I will say, even having a compound in Old English, I would prefer if there were just a word already for that kind of thing. Not necessarily dishwasher. Dishwasher might not even be a good example because I don't write dishwasher in my journal very much. I do write that I have to do dishes sometimes, but I have an easier way to do that. But it's just that kind of thing is part of why I've tried to make journaling, specific conlangs for journaling rather than just general conlangs like Quenya and Sindarin, which are more artistic, poetic languages made for a fictional world and less for use in everyday life. I've tried to make journal languages that are meant for my journaling, and I'll explain that a little bit more when we get to the personal column. Now Tokipona works out a little bit better sometimes. I do use it still. At least I use the Sitla and Pona symbols, the words in the sort of that written form of Tokipona, which is not the only written form of Tokipona, but they are useful as symbols for me to remember things that I regularly have to do, especially habits. I have symbols that I use, and it's also nominative accusative, but I put an asterisk, but because it has it's every verb can be ergative also. it has accusative syntax, but it has some weird stuff when it comes to alignment, in terms of switching the agent and the patient when you switch from transitive and intransitive. I think it's true to say that it's nominative accusative, but I put an asterisk because it does some weird things. And this language at the bottom here is one that I've made with a group of people, and I use it pretty regularly in my journal still. And what I like about it is, you'll see in the second column it says semantic role. It uses semantic role marking, which is a system that I am very happy with. I like how that works, because rather than doing an alignment the way that all these natural languages and conlangs do, it unaligns, I guess. It makes you have to be explicit with who does what when, and the verb doesn't do any of that work, which I like, at least for the purpose of the language. And what the language is useful for me for is, I especially use it when I'm doing the sort of mental health journaling stuff. Like if I'm feeling a certain way and I want to talk about my feelings, I will use this conlang in my journal. It's written in the Arabic script right now because that's one of the scripts that we use for it. That's not the only script or the main script even. It's just one of the official scripts that we use, and I like writing it that way when I'm just, yeah. Also, writing an Arabic script is fun. My Arabic is not good enough yet to journal in it, but I would like it to be at some point in the future. But the Arabic script is still fun to write in, even if it's not Arabic that I'm writing. All right. So in terms of like languages that I consistently like use the most and enjoy using and aren't English or one of these other natural languages that I end up, so like Old English is my go-to, I think. I put English at the top just because I think technically if you counted, there'd be more English throughout all of my journals, but in my recent, like last couple journals, it's mostly been Old English. And then this language here, I use for mental health journaling, and that kind of fills that role. So given that I already have a language that's mostly meant for mental health journaling, although I can imagine having a conlang that also fills that role and I don't need to use this one anymore. I do enjoy using it for that though, is the thing, so it's probably going to stay. I have made lots of attempts at journal conlangs, personal conlangs. And I think at this point it would be good to start showing you what I mean with some of these. And these, you can see, have different alignments, a lot more diverse group of alignments. One of them is accusative, but I'll explain why. So, I guess now would be a time to go back to this page where I can explain, if it wants to let me. Oh no, I'm going to have to start closing tabs. Okay. The other thing with these conlangs that is important to talk about, I guess, is the type in terms of origin, which I don't have on the other types page, whether they are a posteriori or a priori, because that is going to have a big impact on this conversation and the conversation of like what am I going to end up doing. So with a language like Old English or with Ancient Egyptian, for example, there might not be a word for a thing in my everyday life just because of when they were spoken in terms of Old English or Ancient Egyptian, and I have to make up a compound to mean that thing with its existing vocabulary. With languages like Quenya and Sindarin, it's a similar issue. I have to make things up. But the difference is, with English, I can take real-world words and do that, and I can also borrow words in. With Quenya and Sindarin are what are called a priori languages. So they are not directly based on any real-world languages. They are inspired heavily by real-world languages. There are huge influences from real-world languages that Tolkien used for these. But he wasn't saying, like, okay, I'm going to take Finnish and put it through sound change to make it into Quenya. It's just, I am going to copy some features of Finnish and some aesthetics of Finnish and Latin and Greek and make a conlang that has those features, but it's its own thing. And occasionally there will be a word that looks like it's very similar to an existing word. He was probably inspired by it, but he wasn't going to say, like, this Quenya word comes from this Latin word. That's not how it works. It's a priori in that, you know, it has its own origin within the mental world of Tolkien. He came up with the words using inspiration, but not based directly on a language that exists in our world. Tokipona is a very different story. Tokipona is a posteriori, meaning it comes from real-world languages, but mostly just in its vocabulary. Its grammar is very a priori. It's very like, it's a form of syntax that Sonia Lang came up with, sort of like unique from all the languages she was pulling from. She wasn't pulling from their grammar, she was pulling from their vocabulary. And she took words from many different languages and like brought them into what is pronounceable with the Tokipona sound inventory. Like Toki is from Tok in Tok Pisin, and Pona is from Bona in Esperanto. And so Bona becomes pona because there's no B that's separate in Tokipona. You could pronounce this bona in Tokipona and it would be correct, but like P and B are not separate letters. They're not separate sounds in Tokipona. And you can't just have tok from Tokpisin because you can't end a word in a consonant other than N. So that's why there's this I here that comes in to just kind of be like, okay, you need a vowel. You have to have a vowel. So she put in a vowel that sounded nice. And that's how you get Tokipona. That's how you get Tokipona vocabulary. You just if you look at a Tokipona word, it comes from a real world language. There are a couple words, I think, that she just completely made up, or just, they're like from sound, like onomatopoeia, but for the most part, they all come from natural languages. It's just not, she didn't just pick a language and transform it into Tokipona. She like kind of, the world's languages were her like grab bag to grab words from. And that's still the case when new words are created in Tokipona. People take them from world languages. This language is completely a priori, this one that my friends and I made. There is some onomatopoeia, but the words aren't like borrowed from existing world languages. If you have a proper noun, you can just simply borrow the real world language, but one of the things is you're supposed to represent it in its original writing system, so that makes it look really ugly. So what usually happens is names are made up with this language's vocabulary. Like you take two existing words in the language, and that becomes now the name of that thing in the language. But I don't really need proper nouns that much when I use this in my journal, because it's about emotions and stuff and just general things that make me feel a certain way. If there's a person, I usually already have a name for them in this language. Or I can tell from context who I'm talking about. So, again, it's not as much of a problem, especially with the limited way I use this in my journal. Now, I can finally talk about these. So, two of these are a posteriori, and two of these are a priori. Or the rest of them are a priori. And I've actually talked about Huraskan on this channel. I did a conlang showcase. I don't know if it's still up, but I did do it. The first one, this is not, I'm going to reiterate, these are not my only ones. This is not even my first one. This is my, like, bajillionth one, and that is a real number I just made up. I didn't make up bajillion, but that's how many times I've made conlangs. Exactly 1 bajillion times before I made this one. But this language is a language where I specifically wanted to say, what are the minimal number of words I need in this language to make it work. I was thinking a lot about languages like Tokipona that are minimalist, and this language, which also has like sort of a minimal words bent in terms of its vocabulary. I was thinking about that. So like, what do I need minimally to like have a language that can function to communicate my ideas? But then also, what words do I frequently need in my journal? Like, what things come up a ton? So I like went back through my journal and looked and made a list of things that came up a lot in my journal. And that approach you'll see repeated quite a bit as we go down the personal conlangs I've made for my journals specifically. So this is my document for Lambasala. And Lambasala is a language with a focus system alignment or trigger system, or it's called different things. Symmetrical voice is another name for it, and it's sometimes called Austronesian alignment because it's mostly found in Austronesian languages. And it's an isolating language. I'll explain what that is in a bit. But and it uses particles, and then it has this is like vocabulary I did. I didn't get through finishing it, but I had like long list of like things that come up in my journal, and like, okay, I'll cross these off as I go, so that I have a word for that thing. So that's sort of how I approached this conlang, and I didn't get very far with it. So I only had I had some things figured out, and I started journaling in it, but it just didn't work for me. And I'll go back and explain why in a little bit. But I'm going to move on to the next one just so I can close this this tab. And that one was, I was very like loose in like letting myself be inspired by real world languages or conlangs, but it was a priori. Like the words were made up by me entirely. Now Gwethaden is a fun one because Gwethaden is an a posteriori language from Common Eldarin, which is the proto-language from which both Quenya and Sindarin come. So it's a posteriori from one of Tolkien's conlangs. And what it is I took Common Eldarin phonology and grammar, but then I made my own grammar. And the grammar is very, like, different. And the way that the vocabulary works is a lot more Tokipona-esque in terms of, like, being a lot more vague, but having words for specific things that I wanted in my journal. I didn't actually do the latter part enough, I think, and that's one of the flaws with this language, is I didn't think enough about, journal vocabulary compared to Lanvasala. I wanted it to be very easy to loan in words from other languages because of that issue that I was talking about a minute ago with, like, loaning in things into, like, ancient Egyptian or the group conlang that I journal emotional stuff in. This would have the opposite of that problem. Like, it just wouldn't have that problem. I could easily loan things in. I would have a big enough phonology. This is a pretty big phonology compared to most of my other journal langs. It's not a huge phonology in terms of how many sounds there are, but it's a lot more than I usually go for. Like, substantially. When it comes to journal conlangs and has a 5L system, that's not super common for me, but I did like how it sounded, ultimately. I liked the aesthetic of it a bit, not as much as I hoped I would, and I think it's partially because of how isolating it is. The Eldarin languages are pretty fusional. Quenya less so. Quenya is more agglutinative, and I like Quenya a lot. I like how agglutinative it is. Sindarin is much more fusional, but this language is super not. It's, like, very isolating. You could easily fuse a lot of these things together is the thing, but it would be weird. So I ultimately just didn't end up liking the aesthetic of this language, which is a shame because I made it because I liked the aesthetic of Eldarin languages, and I thought, ooh, if it's in Elvish, which I already know, like, a substantial amount of vocabulary in, and so, like, having it be a related language to Elvish is, like, would be nice, and I like how they sound, and because it's my Elvish language that I'm engineering to be suited for my journal, I will have all the extra benefits of that I don't have with, like, Quenya or Sindarin, where I have to, like, find a word for dishwasher. I can, like, have a word that means the things that I want it to mean, derived from Common Eldarin, and I'll be fine and good, and I'll like how it sounds. I didn't end up liking that much how it sounds. Looking back over it, I'm, like, looking at these sentences, and I'm like, it's not it, my friend. It's not what I wanted aesthetically. And the aesthetic is very important when it comes to a journal language because it's what I'm going to be writing in every day. This one didn't even happen. I just like that I call it New Journal Lang Written. And then it's just a bunch of mostly empty things when it comes to, like, things I need words for, and it just isn't filled out at all. Here's another one. This one I love. It's called Journaling Attempt. I'm not even going to read the full name. You can see it. I just thought it was a funny name. And this is, like, goals. I blacked one out because I didn't want it to be on stream, but yeah, I had a phonology for this one, and I started assigning meanings. I like wrote things I would need words for, and you can see how empty this is. Things that come up in my journal a lot. So yeah, this is just, like, me trying to apply that approach of I'm going to start with what do I need, what words do I need, and then think about the aesthetics and then slot that in. But you can see I got so demotivated so quickly when applying this approach to it, because it makes it feel so clinical, especially when I am working with, I think my idea here was this would be a priori as with the last one. Now this one is another a priori one. I liked the phonology here quite a bit, like, in terms of, like, the sounds at first. I liked where I was going with this. I don't like how this verb system came out at the end of the day. I do like the concept of these things. I was playing with this a lot in other conlangs, not just for journaling at this time, and I wanted to, like, have a lot of marking for emotions and stuff on things. I really liked that idea. But ultimately, I didn't even get very far. I just came up with a grammar system and then ran away. Then we come to Huraskan, and the story with Huraskan is interesting. I've talked about it before on this channel. Like I said, I can't remember if the stream is still up for that, or the recording of that. But it started actually not as this kind of conlang, it started as just symbols. Like I made a logography basically for my journal. I made symbols for most of the things I needed. There were some things I didn't get to, actually quite a few things I didn't get to making symbols for. And it was working pretty well. I liked the aesthetic of my logography a lot. I've forgotten most of it now, unfortunately. Yeah, logographic orthography that was created beforehand. So I liked that logography a lot. I liked how it worked. I even liked how it had grammar to it and how the grammar worked as well. But I am I'm a very auditory learner / thinker. Like my inner monologue is very auditory. Like I hear myself speaking in my head a lot when I'm thinking. In different languages, depending on the day and the time and the context, but I do hear, words. And journaling in a completely, purely logographic sense was difficult for me. Like, I could do it because I knew the symbols, but not having, a sound to go with it was very, disorienting for me, I guess is the word. So what I decided to do is, retroactively give it, a phonological realization, actually make a speakable version of it, of the system. And I like what came out of it. I liked this language a lot. I don't like it for journaling anymore. I like how it sounds. I like the aesthetic. I like the grammar a lot. I've replicated this similar grammar in different forms than this. This is a non-concatenative grammar. Either where the consonants go between the vowels and vice versa. But I've replicated similar types of marking, but just in different forms from this language because I like it so much. However, I like it much less for journaling now that it has more full realization. It's hard to explain why. Basically, in making this a language, I ended up making a list of more words than just the journal ones that I needed, because I was well, if this is going to be a language, I want more words. And so I made more words. And given its phonology, I ended up running out of space for words, theoretical words. I need longer words. I need longer roots, which this grammar does not accommodate. So it is kind of a minimal language now. It's a minimalistic language that I like a lot. Sorry, my dog is out of 10. Okay. It's a minimal language. It's a lot more like Tokipona in terms of its vocabulary now, how many words there are and how you put them together to make compounds. But that ends up being super inefficient for talking about specific things. I run back into the dishwasher problem with this language, not of my own volition. I mean, it's my fault. But just in the process of making it into language, I unsuited it to journaling. And that's the problem. I'm a big fan of this language and how it turned out. I don't regret that I made this language. I regret that it made me not want to use this language as a journaling language anymore, because I really did like the logography. And if I've considered separating the logography from this again and trying again, starting over. That's one thing I've been thinking about for a while, because I really did like that logography. But I need to think about it more, because now the logography and this language are very tied in my head, and I need to separate that. There's still time. I haven't actually uploaded any of the images of the logograms onto my documentation like I planned. The glyphs were going to go here. So yeah, that's Huraskan. Okay, then there's Daman. Or wait, is Daman the next one I want to talk about? No, I want to talk about Albiska next. So Albiska is a Germanic language, heavily inspired by Gothic. It's Gothic phonology, slightly different syntax. It's like if you took Gothic and made it more consistent and simple and less like a natural language, basically, and more engineered. But I had a great list of lots of words. I basically have the vocabulary for this language figured out. There's still some journal specific stuff I don't have words for, but that's easily rectifiable. I could easily make this a language that could be suited vocabulary-wise to my journal. But I ended up not liking what I did to the grammar. I wanted to take Gothic grammar and make it more consistent so that it would be like very, like I don't need to think about anything while I'm writing. Like I know what this word is. I know based on its ending like how you decline it. I know how to use it in the context. Doing that made me hate it. Not hate it, but doing that made me no longer like it, because I think part of what I like about Gothic is its grammar and how idiosyncratic it is. I love it. I love Gothic grammar so much. The only reason I don't journal in Gothic is because I guess I just haven't gotten around to it. I know I'm going to have the same dishwasher problem type thing, I think, and in anticipation of that, I don't even try. Which is sad. That's not to say there's no Gothic in my journal. When I'm like filling out space, you probably saw I talked about this before when I did my journal with me stream. I talked about how I end up with empty space sometimes, and I go back and I fill that in with like notes or little poems or doodles. A lot of the time those are in Gothic because I love Gothic so much, but I don't actually set out and journal in Gothic. And I think the reason for that is because of me anticipating the same problems that I end up having with like ancient Egyptian and stuff in my journal, in Quenya and Sindarin. So I ended up not liking this language just because it's kind of like I took the spice and the flavor, like I kept the ingredients of Gothic, but I took out the seasoning, I guess is what I should say. Not all of it. Like, I even added some interesting stuff with the grammar. I did like how verbs conjugated and stuff. It's just, the whole point was I was trying to make it predictable, but I made it too predictable. And the other thing is, because it's so close to Gothic, the other reason I chose this language is because one of my things with making journalangs, and we'll get into this when I talk about the journalangs again, once I close all these many, many tabs, is I need, part of why the aesthetic matters to me is I need to be motivated. If the language is a priori, I need to be motivated enough to want to know the vocabulary to be able to use this language, which means I need to want to know what every word means as quickly as possible. And that's why I've made like memorize courses, like memorize card decks for some of my conlangs. But if I don't like it enough, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to learn it, and then I won't use it. That's part of what happened with Huraskan. I wanted to still try to use it for my journal, and I did use it for my journal. Once I did make some words, I still tried. But I didn't like the vocabulary enough to want to be consistent with it and like remind myself, oh yeah, that's the word for that. Which is a shame. So, what I wanted here with this language, Albiska, is I wanted the benefit of it being a Germanic language, and therefore me already knowing a lot of the vocabulary because I already write in Old English and Gothic, and yeah, like I'm already familiar with a lot of the vocabulary. But the problem with that is I made it simultaneously too similar to Gothic, like way too similar, to the point where I confused myself sometimes because I was like, okay, this word, okay, in Gothic this is like this stem and this is how it declines, but no, it's not. I made it regular in this language. So it's the other way. Like I had to put an effort to use the easier grammar that I made here a lot of the time because of the Gothic being like in my brain. So I should have made it less similar to Gothic. And I did actually go and make another conlang, another Germanic conlang that's very different than like most of the existing Germanic languages. I really like that other conlang, but it's not meant for journaling. It's much more just like purely artistic thing. And I really like it. It's called Iusk. And I still need to put documentation for it on my website. It's on my list there, but I haven't put documentation. But it's not at all meant for journaling. It would not be suited to journaling. So, that is Albiska. I also made like a new Gothic-esque alphabet to write it in, sort of like a hybrid. If you took runes and you took the Gothic alphabet that's based on Greek and like hybridized them, that's what I wrote this in, and I did like it at first, but I ended up not liking it ultimately. Alright, then we have a weird one. It's one of my favorite. This, I think, if you want to go narrow down to like the category of conlangs I have made specifically for journals, and I don't include Huda Askan in that anymore because it's not suited for journals anymore. This, I think, is my favorite journal conlang I've made. And I would hate to journal in it because I have tried. I tried for like a couple weeks and I hated journaling in it. But this is still my favorite journal conlang because of how it works. That doesn't make sense to you probably. See, look at the goals. Efficient and minimal bullet journal organization. That's the goal. So it's meant to just be like the meta-organization part of journaling. And I love the phonology here. It's a tiny, tiny inventory. Tiny consonant inventory. I think this is smaller than Rotokas. Like, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, I can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What is wrong with me? Which I think is what Rako has. I think Rako has 6 consonants as well. Or is it 4? I think it's 6. But I love this phonology. It just means I have so little to work with. But I loved that about it. I love the phonology. And I love the syntax. I love how the syntax works. It's it's very much inspired by the Huda Askan system, which I have been calling the distance, I call it distance alignment, or like event distance or predicate distance alignment. Sometimes I call it proximity alignment. They're the same. Distance and proximity are just, they're kind of like the same measure, just using the near version versus the far version as your root for the word. But yeah, I usually call it distance alignment at this point. It's not a naturalistic alignment. It doesn't exist in any real-world languages that I've ever seen. I made it up because I'm weird. I said, like, what if active-stative role marking worked more like semantic role marking, but then also you only had 3 cases to work with in the entire language to be super minimal. And then with word order basically form a focus system that you can then front here, put it before the verb, and now you have like a really weird, it's just, I'm in love with the alignment, but it's not naturalistic, but it works great for how my brain works. I love it. And if I make another a priori journaling, I would want it to have this alignment. And that's part of my struggle recently with trying to make journalings is I want this alignment, but I can't make it from a naturalistic language. But then if I'm not making it from a natural language, I have the problem of it better be darn beautiful because otherwise I won't be motivated to learn the vocabulary at all. And that was my problem here. I didn't love the vocabulary very much. Like, it wasn't very memorable for me. It is a closed class verb system. Like, these are the only verbs allowed. And then you can nominalize them to make them, like, related nouns. So that was fun. But yeah, these are the only verbs in the language. However, you can take a noun and put it in the verb slot and it still works. It's just, like, a little bit... like, you need to make it clear that you're doing that. There's like a verbalizer option you have. And I had like these systems of like, to try to like stretch the vocabulary. For months, I have like 4 seasons and then 3 words for like the first, second, and third month in that season. So to say like April, you'd say like second month of spring. And that puts you in that thing. So that was a way to get my minimal... phonology, get more bang for my buck, basically. And I did that for days of the week and other things. I even did that for like emotions, colors, and places. So that was fun. Like different kinds of places. So like room in my house, if it was in the house context, would also just be like a different thing in an outside context. It was I liked the system. It wasn't super easy to learn. I made flashcards for this language for sure. On my Memrise. However, I really liked it. I did a lot of like trying to translate things into this just for the fun of it. Like, is that even translatable into this language with how minimal its vocabulary and phonology is? This is not a functional language, like as a real full language. Like, you can't have a conversation in it very easily. I could probably make a way to like have a back and forth, how are you kind of conversation. But I didn't make enough vocabulary for it to be a fully fledged language, because this was like as narrow as I ever got. This was like the narrowest of the narrow for, this is for my journal and that's it. And I don't think I can replicate this. I don't want to replicate this. I don't want this vocabulary. I didn't end up liking how things sounded ultimately. But I loved the concept and the aesthetic of how things ended up looking. It's very isolating, like very short words, very isolating, which when coupled with me writing it in a unique writing system that I made for it in my journal looked so illegible. Like everything looks so similar just because of how small the vocabulary is. Now, this is a conlang that is not a journal lang. I called this vibes lang, but I really did like what I did with the grammar here, and that's why I opened it up. This is my goals. It's just this chill. I didn't actually write out my goals for this language, but this is the phonology, which I think it's a weird phonology, but I did like it. And then this is like grammar stuff, and I did end up liking how the grammar came out. And these are the only words I made for it, which, yeah, mostly grammar. These are like grammatical things, and then like there's like one sort of just our expression type word, like saho, which was I or eyes. So yeah, this one didn't get very far. Now, I've tried making more journalings since I used that one's like from like a year or so ago, I think. However, I haven't written in my journal in a conlang other than this one that I use sometimes in a long time. And I want a conlang I can journal in. So what are my issues? If we actually review what the issues were with the languages that I came up with. The first one was that I couldn't learn the vocabulary because I didn't like the aesthetic enough. So, like, aesthetic is important. So I'm going to put X, aesthetic. Oh, that's not going to have enough time. Or space. I guess I'll just write aesthetic. It's like a problem. I was hoping smaller font. I don't know why it's so big. Just go like 8. Hopefully that's still visible. Okay. My problem here was aesthetic. I think my problem with Gwethanen ended up being aesthetic too. Because with La Masala, I was zooming in on vocabulary I needed. With Gwethanen, that was also a bit of a problem with vocab. Vocab, if I'm making a journal language, there's no excuse for the vocab to be bad, which is why this has so thoroughly been not a journaling anymore. Problem here was, I guess, also aesthetic, but I think it's also just the similarity to Gothic that was a problem here. The fact that it's a posteriori was a problem, and the problem with the a priori ones is if they're not aesthetic enough, then learning it will also be a problem. Here, it was not vocab, it was aesthetic, I think. Yeah, it's looking like with conlangs, my problem so far has mostly been the aesthetic. And here it's like, I think it was like the morphology, syntax stuff. And isn't that funny that the one I had the morphology and syntax problems with was the one that's accusative, like the natural languages that I use? And like it's almost like the whole reason I want a conlang is because I don't want to be using accusative syntax, so why did I do this to myself? Why did I make it so similar to Gothic? But if I make it too different from Gothic, it feels really weird to have like Germanic vocabulary with a completely different syntax. It's just like uncanny valley, and that's uncomfortable. So I think what my issue is, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to identify the issue so that we can get around it. I need to really like the aesthetic. That's number one, because it's a personal conlang. It needs to have the vocabulary I need in order to use it in my journal. And I think with some of those big languages where I just wrote a list and then gave up, I think I gave up because I got overwhelmed. I think writing out the entire list of everything I could possibly need in my journal is not a good strategy. I think it's also why I gave up on these, because I was like, I'll never finish this one, especially the first one. I gave up because I was overwhelmed, and I need to not overwhelm myself. I need to just start small and think, okay, this week, what do I need to write in my journal? And therefore, what words do I need, or like what things do I need to be able to express? And then build from there, which does mean that there will be like a growing period for it, which is a problem for me. If, like, I need this to be efficient, and if I'm going through a period where, like, I'm still building it, it's putting me in that same kind of, like, dishwasher. I've been calling it the dishwasher problem that I have with some of these natlangs and these conlangs. It's the dishwasher problem again, but it's a temporary dishwasher problem. I have the dishwasher problem until I make the word for dishwasher, and then I don't have the dishwasher problem anymore. So I would have to just kind of, like, as I go, it would take work, but I guess the longer I use it, I mean, this kind of feels like common sense, the longer I use the conlang, the easier it becomes and the more efficient it becomes. So it would need to be something that gradually grows rather than just, bam, here's everything I need now, let's get to work making words for it. No, I don't have the energy for that. That's what's happened with that. Even when I did finish that process, pretty much, and even made flashcards to make it easy for myself to learn it, the aesthetic did me in. So it needs to also be aesthetic. So I need to pick, I guess what I need to do is I do need to think ahead a bit. I don't want to do this again. I don't want to do this, what I did here, where it was like super small to the point where I needed to combine words to say a simple thing like Wednesday. There needs to be a way to say Wednesday. I mean, you can combine, I wouldn't mind combining something for Wednesday. That's a bad example, but like the systems of interlocking words that I used here, I'm not going to replicate. So let's see. I'm writing this on a notepad, but I will put it on the screen in a moment. Actually, no, I'll do this here. I just need a new window, or a new sheet. I don't want to use this one because I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to duplicate it so that it's the same size. I don't want just like a one that's not pre-formatted for me that also has like a bajillion tabs. Columns and rows. I don't like that. Let's rename this to parameters, I guess. Like, I don't know, notes. I'll just call this notes for now. And I will make this all disappear. Oh no, my laptop's getting really hot. Oops. You'd think after I closed every single tab except for this one that it would be doing better now, but I feel like my the lag is getting worse somehow. Okay, so I need to make sure, I think first and foremost when it comes to conlangs for my journal is that it needs to be aesthetically pleasing to me. The aesthetic needs to be at the top, which I am a little surprised at. Like, before going through this and reviewing all this process of my stream right now is me thinking through all of this out loud with an audience. I wouldn't have thought that this would be my biggest problem. I thought my biggest problem was the vocabulary. I thought it was me overwhelming myself with the vocabulary, or me not having the right vocabulary, or not planning right to have the right amount of vocabulary with the grammar. I'm actually surprised it's the aesthetic, because I feel like the aesthetic is so wishy-washy, and I think part of my problem is my aesthetic changes so frequently. Or like what I find aesthetically pleasing one day, the next day I'm like, this is so horrible, and I don't like it anymore. And so the fact that this is such a high thing is actually kind of surprising to me. But looking over what the problems were, I think it is like the most important thing. If I'm going to use the language, I need to like it. I need to want to use it. So it needs to be aesthetically pleasing. And aesthetic has two parts to it, I guess. There's the aesthetic of the sound / look of it, like the phonology and orthography that I choose are going to be key here for just like how it looks on the page. Like opening my journal, what do I see? Is it beautiful? Yes, good. I'm going to want to stay in my journal, yay. But also using it, it needs to be aesthetically pleasing in terms of like the grammar. It needs to have features that I enjoy using and that express my thoughts in a way that feels natural to me. Which means that nominative accusative is off the table. That's what I've learned. Don't try to make a journaling that's nominative accusative. Actually, don't even try to do a journaling that's stative anymore. Because I used to do a lot of stative languages, but it just doesn't cut it for me anymore. No. How did it get over there? I don't know how that happened. Okay, stative. It needs to be something else. Either no, I wouldn't like a tripartite language. It needs to, I think, either be either semantic role marking or distance. That like alignment that I made up that I love. So it needs to be semantic or distance alignment, I think, for my brain to work. Or Austronesian maybe, which is like as close to semantic role marking you can get in a natural language without it being just straight up semantic role marking. Like a focus system or distance, I think. I think I want it to be a distance one. Distance alignment. And then the other thing is, I've played with languages being a lot of different combinations of things recently, and just in general. But with my journalings, I've found that I tend to go more isolating, more non-flexive, more separative, and more analytic. So if you did not see like my third or fourth, or I can't remember which one it was, Conlang with me video, I talked about what these things were, what these mean. These are like how you talk about the morphological typology of languages. It's the Bickel and Nichols system, which I find better than the Sapir-Whorf one. Or I think it's just Sapir that made the other one, not Whorf. Edward Sapir. So, how isolating it is like, I guess I'll start down here actually, analytic versus synthetic. Synthetic means that morphemes are connected to each other, and analytic means that they're, separated from each other, basically. English is sort of like a fusional language with it's very analytic looking, but it's a fusional language, which means it is flexive, and it is less, it's not like entirely isolating, it's more synthetic, but yeah. I don't, like, non-linear or non-concatenative is what Huraskan is. It has, like, consonant roots and, like, things slot in to show the grammar, like grammatical relations and things like that. Other than Huraskan and Lambasala a bit, because the idea was the verbs would have ablaut to conjugate, that's not something I tend to do with my conlangs. I tend to make them isolating. I tend to make them non-flexive. I tend to make them separative instead of cumulative. And I tend to make them analytic. And I think the reason for this is I want a language that I feel like I can learn very quickly. And I think I've made the mistaken assumption that in order for that to be the case, it needs to be like languages that I've picked up very quickly. And the two conlangs I learned the quickest to become fluent in were Tokipona, which did not take long at all to become fluent in, and let me go back to my list. Tokipona and this conlang, which I was part of making, and so it did not take very long for me to become fluent. And both Tokipona and that language are very isolating, analytic, non-flexive, separative. Like they both use particles to indicate like grammatical separations, and they both have small words that don't conjugate or decline or anything like that. You use combinations of words to make more complicated meanings of words, and you move the order around and stuff like that. And I do like manipulating order to change meaning, and I think that's why I learned those both very quickly. And I'm like, if I'm going to learn a language very quickly, it probably should be similar. And I think that's a mistake, because if I'm motivated enough to learn the language, it can have different features. It can be flexive, for example. There could be more than one form for something, or it could be more cumulative, or it could be more synthetic. Depends on how synthetic. I don't always like the aesthetic of like having a lot of things that are strung along, in which case it might need to be more cumulative, more like fusional in that sense. So I think I've made a mistake in thinking that in order for my journal language to be easily learnable and quickly learnable for me, it therefore needs to be like morphologically simple. Simple in quotes. Like very isolating and separative and analytic. I think that's been a mistake. The like Tokipona and the other language that I use, the language that I actually use in my journal more for mental health journaling, that system, like that, those features work very well for the language and what it needs to do. But that doesn't mean that that works well for what I need to do. Daman is extremely isolating, but it does not work well for my journal. It just doesn't. So I need to think more outside the box, because I think it's what I enjoy. And that's, I think, when we go back to Albiska, like, my problem with it was too similar to Gothic without the things I like about Gothic, like the sort of irregular stuff. The different, like, everything was too predictable with Albiska. So predictable that it threw me off. And I think that's why I'm going to get rid of these comics because I didn't end up needing them. I think that's why I ended up abandoning it and not liking it anymore, because like it has all these features I like. It's like Gothic, except, and it's that except part, I made it too similar to a language like Tokipona, where everything is like very predictable. It's not. I mean, it had conjugation and declension and stuff, but I simplified that down to what I thought would be more manageable, but it was less authentic to me. Like, it just felt less good. And I think that's my problem. So I need to be more open. So, like, I don't want it to be isolating or analytic. I mean, it can be analytic. It can have elements of both, but I don't want to be stuck in it being like too, what's the word? I don't want it to be stuck in being too much like those very isolating, minimalist-leaning languages. It doesn't have to be minimalist to be efficient for my journal. And I think that's hard for me to think about just because like minimalist adjacent, because even when I'm not doing a minimalist language, my impulse when I've made these conlang vocabularies, when I have developed the vocabularies more like for Albiska, for example, is that I there's something in my brain that wants it to theoretically be useful outside of the context of my journal. I want to be able to say like, oh, I'm going to translate this thing into the language. Like, I want to be able to look at a book and be able to say what I just read in my journaling, even though it's not necessary. So therefore, I end up making the words a little bit more vague in terms of what they have to mean. Like, I sort of broaden what they could mean so as to theoretically be applicable to something not in my journal. The only place I didn't do that quite as much was in Daman. But what I'm going to do here, I think, with my journal, is make it as I go. Like I was saying, it has to be gradual, which means there will be like an adjustment period, like a growing pains kind of thing, where it's like, I don't have a word for this yet, I have to make a word for it. But it will be worth it in the long run, I think, because I will end up liking it better and wanting to use it more. And also just the process of going through that experience will probably endear me to it more, I hope / expect, just because I'll become attached to it, is my hope. Sorry. I was just checking that I didn't miss a super important call or something. Okay, so more think that the ways that I think the things that I've avoided the most, in terms of the typology, have been making things cumulative. I've kept things very separative, like Tokipona, keeping things, and I've made things non-flexive, like everything has one form. Things can have more than one form. Especially if I do these together, it's like when you decline something, it might change its form a little bit or something like that. I think the cumulative thing is the thing I care about more, though. Actually, no, it's okay. I do want these to be I think I like an inflected language. Currently, some friends and I are, like for the last year, have been making a group conlang. And the thing I really like about it is it's pretty analytic, but there are elements of synthesis. There are elements of, like, there are sort of like fusional affixes on the verb that conjugate it, and I really like our verb conjugation system. It's very nice. And I feel like something like that, where it's not a ton of conjugation, but it has like a nice, decent amount, that I would be happy with, because it's still sort of simple enough, like it's not a ton of irregularities and stuff, but there's still like little things that make it interesting. Instead of having to, like, say, have like a separate particle that makes it the past tense or something, have a past tense mark. Gosh darn it. Even though I think part of the thing is, in my journal, I don't need to distinguish tense very often, just because I have, like, my calendar in here and it says what day a thing is, so I don't need tense very often. But, you know, other types of things. There are other types of things I could encode flexionally that don't have to be separated out, like, the same way that I have been. And I guess the other thing I have been avoiding, I haven't really avoided nonlinear, because I did do huraskan nonlinearly on purpose. But I've been doing too much isolating, and I need to do less. So, like, have a, what's the word? Have one morpheme mean multiple things at the same time, if that makes sense. Like what happens in the conlang I was just talking about with my friends. Like, we have an ending that makes it both past tense and a certain evidentiality together. It's not like you do the past tense then evidentiality, or vice versa, like concatenative. It's like fused entirely, which is nice. And it's like you add it onto the end, so it's concatenative in that way. And it's cumulative rather than separative. So I'm going to be more okay with these kinds of things. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to write here, though. I guess, like, fusion, like some elements of fusion and synthesis. Some. Doesn't need to be, like, a whole sentence is one word kind of thing. Kind of swings in the other direction a little bit too much for me, but that sort of thing. And I think all this falls under aesthetic. Like, that's all part of the aesthetics of language. None of that is definitely functional. I mean, I want things to be functional for what I need in my language, but the way that I go about expressing the ideas needs to be in a form that I like. Now, the other thing is vocabulary. And the thing that I was saying is, I don't want to overwhelm myself. I need to build gradually as I go through my journal. And by the way, I just want to stress that this is just for me. Like, these are just my parameters. I think most people would probably want their journaling to be active, or to be nominative accusative. Me not wanting these things is very much an idiosyncratic thing for myself, because my brain is weird, I think. I just think very strangely when it comes to needing arguments, roles to be clear. And I also prefer what it does to the vocabulary. It does make me need fewer words for things that are usually different words in different languages. They're all one word, and the distance alignment makes it clear what the word means. But I do think build gradually is a good advice, because what I've done has not worked for me. Just writing a list of all the things that I know are going to come up in my bullet journal just overwhelms me entirely. As you could see from those like empty, basically like long lists with no glosses of like what it would be in my conlang, because I gave up so quickly. It's just overwhelming. And I don't think it's a good idea to do. Unless you don't get overwhelmed by that kind of thing, like you know you'll be fine, then sure. But I'm just imparting what I've learned from this experience, which is that it's not a good idea. So just think about, like, what do I need this week? Like, when I'm setting up my bullet journal for the coming week, I'll think about, like, what things am I going to write in here? I mean, I can't always predict the future, but, like, what things do I know I have this week that I want to express in the conlang? And how would I say those in this conlang? So I do need to set myself up. I do need to set myself up for success in order to, like, make it so that I can build new vocabulary in a way that is as little, like, intense effort and hassle as possible. Which brings me to the next part, which is, what kind of conlang should this be? So, I'm going to go back here. I have shown this before when I talked about types of conlangs a long time ago in Conlang with Me. This sort of triangle, the gnoli triangle, labio gnoli, where there's like this sort of goals of conlangs. And my journalangs tend to fall like here for me. They're not oxlangs because I'm not trying to facilitate communication with anyone. It's just myself. I'm not trying to like make an Esperanto between different people. So it's not an oxlang. It falls here usually in the triangle because obviously I want it to be aesthetically pleasing, which is why it's here and not, way over here. But it does have an engineered goal of being efficient for my conlang. Or efficient for my journal, I mean. So, like, I've started with, but the thing is, when I start with a big list of things I need, and then lay that all out, like, I'm going to engineer it to be perfect for that, which is kind of what I did with Daman, and most successfully with Daman, in that I made a systematized thing and went through. The system didn't really work for me, and every other time I've done it, I just get overwhelmed. I'm like engineering it too hard to the point where I won't, even if I do make it, like if I do succeed, I won't like the aesthetic of it because it's not built for what I like. It's built for what I need only. And that's a problem for me. I mean, that's generally a problem for journaling for myself anyway. Like, if my journal is just a to-do list, then I don't like it. Like, I don't want to open it if it's just my to-do list. If it has my to-do list, but also, like, my thoughts and, like, plans and, like, ideas and some artwork that I'm doing and, other little things like that. And if it has decoration and, my working things out emotionally, like, then I want to use my journal. And I think I should take that same approach to the conlang. Like, yes, it should be efficient. It should be what I need, but I shouldn't have to, it's a bad idea, I think, for myself to start just with what I need. I need to be thinking as much, if maybe not more, because of how high up aesthetic was in my, like, abandonment of conlangs. It needs to be more what I like, because at the end of the day, I don't need a journal conlang. So making my conlang around what I need is the problem. I don't need a journal conlang. I could just journal in a natural language. I could just journal in English or Italian or Spanish or something. I don't need this. I want it because I like the idea of journaling in a conlang. I like having a language that's just for me. That I get to enjoy myself. It's like my own, it's like kind of like, how do I explain this? It's like having like alone time, I guess, but in a language. It's like my safe space in my brain, in my journal. I don't know. It's not like a code. It's not like I'm trying to hide what's in my journal. That's done sufficiently well with my writing system. Like the very few people who can read Tengwar don't even know the mode that I use, like won't necessarily know the mode I use in order to decode the Old English, and then they have to know Old English once they decode it. I'm not worried about people reading my journal. It's just more of like it makes it more mine, if that makes sense. It makes it more personal and meaningful. That like, not only am I writing this in my journal, but I'm doing it in a form of expression that is unique to myself. And if that's why I'm journaling, I should focus a lot more on the aesthetic than on the need aspect, because I don't need it. That's the thing at the end of the day. You don't need to write your journal in a conlang. Unless there's like a reason why you need to keep your journal safe, like genuinely, make a code, make a cipher, like make up an alphabet that only you know. If you like for safety reasons, the stuff you need to write about needs to stay private, or just don't write it, because if someone sees that your book is in code, they might interrogate you and ask you what it is. But my point is, there's no situation where you ever need to have a conlang to write your journal in. It's a purely a want thing. And so because it's purely a want, the language should be what I want it to be. And yes, useful for my journal is a part of it, because if it's not useful enough, then I won't use it. Like, I'm not gonna. Like, that's what happened with Huraskan. I like Huraskan a lot, but it's not useful for my journal anymore. So what I need to do is care a lot more than I have been about the aesthetic, and a lot less about, like, worry less about, like, the whole list of here's everything I need to be able to say in my whole journal, possibly, and would this also be useful outside of my journal? No. I just need to start journaling in it. I need to start with something I like, start journaling in it, make the words as I go, have a nice, neat place to keep the vocabulary, so that I don't forget it, and, like, practice it if I need to. I can come up with systems for that very easily. But I need it to be gradual, like, start here, and it will gradually become what I want to use in my journal, and therefore it will be efficient for my journal, because I'll want to open my journal. That's the most important thing, to get me to open my journal. It could be the most efficient thing in the world, but I'll be bored and demotivated and stressed if all I do is write my to-dos, That being said, that puts me in the next quandary, which is a priori or a posteriori. And this is probably the question I struggle with the most. I have literally stayed up at night thinking about this before. Okay, let me explain the problem. And it kind of goes back to that problem of, like, being motivated to use the language. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, I could be journaling in a language that exists. And there are times when my brain gets into this place where it's like, using a conlang not only is not needed, but is a waste of time, because there are languages that you are studying and learning, Grimm's Lawyer, that you would do good to practice in your journal. And I'm like, fair. I have other ways to practice other than my journal. Because, again, at the end of the day, my journal isn't about what shouldn't just be what I have to do. It should be what I want to do. Because otherwise I'm, again, demotivated, and it makes me stressed and feel like I'm just not living life the way I want to be living life if I'm only doing what is on my to-do list, So if studying Arabic is on my to-do list, I don't, yes, doing my to-do list in Arabic would be, a good way to practice. I would recommend that to, language students I have, try journaling in the language you're learning. But my journal isn't about what I have to do, or even my goals. It's just about living my life from day to day and, relaxing sometimes, taking some time with my journal to just have a moment of calm and, maybe write down goals I have, ideas for the future, but to not make it so much about being productive and being, how far along on my goals am I? It's more just am I getting through the week, doing what I need to do, and making time for myself to do what I want to do, and am I enjoying, am I living the moment that I want to be living, if that makes sense. Not to get super philosophical about this, but it's just, I do get in a headspace sometimes where I'm like, this is a waste of time, I should be journaling in, Irish, or, a natural language that I have a goal of learning, but I'm trying to explain why I don't think that's a healthy mindset for myself, because I want this to be just for me. If it's an Irish, it's not just for me. If it's an Arabic, it's not just for me. If it's an Italian even, it's not just for me. It's just, I want that sort of personal thing. And that's why the aesthetic matters. The question, though, then becomes, I need to be motivated enough to learn it and take the time that I would otherwise be dedicating to a natural language. Precious, limited time I have on this earth. Instead of studying a natural language I want to learn, take the time to learn the journal language. And because of all the things I just explained, it would be worth it if I liked the language enough. I need to really like the language is the problem. But it also, like I was saying over here, needs to be a language that I can easily build new vocabulary in, not, having a mini crisis over what the word for dishwasher is going to be on Sunday or whenever it is that I'm planning out my next week. If I'm building the language gradually and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write down what I'm going to do this week, when I'm going to hang out with friends, all that kind of stuff, I don't want to be laboring over oh no, what is the word for park or something if I'm going to the park. I don't want to be sitting having a little, I don't want to spend 20 minutes figuring out what the word for park is. And so then the question becomes, how do I build vocabulary in this language? Is it, and same with grammar too, how to build grammar. Is it a priori or a posteriori? Can I just make up a word entirely out of my brain that sounds nice, sounds aesthetically connected to the thing that I want to say? Or do I base it on a language I know, which, on the one hand, could be less mental energy to have than having to come up whole cloth with a new one? I could just be oh, well, in this language it's this, and this is what it would become. But that could also be a labor-intensive process, depending on how I do that. I could be okay, I'm deriving this language from Gothic or, Greek. And then if I have it derived from Greek, I have to put it through those systems of okay, what happens to this ending? What does this become? And I have to do mental, the equivalent of math, but the phonology equivalent of arithmetic to get it into my conlang. Now, if it's simple enough, I'm pretty good at memorizing those kinds of sound changes, especially if it's simple and I'm the one who made them up. But that could be brain intensive in a different direction than this one. Now, there is a middle ground where I just say, I do a hybrid, and there are a couple different ways of doing hybrids, hybrid of a priori grammar, a posteriori vocab, or the reverse. The reverse I've seen less. But I could do a thing where I just say whatever, I just make the word, let's say I come to the word for park. I could just do whatever comes to my brain first. And so that could end up being a Romance word or a Greek word or an Elvish word for something, depending on what it is. The issue with that is I would not like the result, I think. I think I would not like the aesthetic result of all those different words coming into my language, even if it all became consistent with the phonology. It would feel like a kitchen sink. It wouldn't be a kitchen sink language in the usual definition of the word, but it would feel it would feel messy. And messy is not my aesthetic when it comes to the vocabulary of a conlang. It would just feel messy to me. So that middle approach is something I would not enjoy, I think. Even though it would be the simplest in terms of vocab generation. I could just look around the room and be like, what's the first thing that comes to mind for this thing? And make up a nice sounding word. It could be an a priori one, it could be an a posteriori one. But that just ends up being super messy to me. Super, super messy. So I, just because aesthetic is so high on this list, surprisingly, to me, it shouldn't be a surprise. I explained why it shouldn't be a surprise, but it is to me, because I always thought that my problem was vocabulary and grammar. But at the end of the day, it was just, I wasn't emphasizing the aesthetic enough to want to learn it. So there's pros and cons. So I'll do pros and cons, actually. I did this with the conlang with me, conlang too. But those goals were very different. It was much more of an engineered language, and so my answers were very different probably than what we're going to come up with now. So the pros are, you know, I guess the pros of one are the cons of the other, kind of. The cons are more effort to learn, because I don't have like a, you know, cognate I can attach it to. Like I don't have like, oh, that's related to this word that I know in this language, you know. More effort to learn. And it will take like creative juice to make. The pro is it's more unique to me. And slash more like, you know, because it's coming out of my brain and no one else's. And I'm going to try to come up with 2 pros and 2 cons for each. If there are 2 pros and 2 cons. If there are more cons that I think of, I'll add, but I'm just going to format it like this. Okay, more unique to me, and I guess it's like the opposite of the con of a posteriori. I don't have to like put it through sound change necessarily to get what I want. Like it can be like instantaneous creation. You know, I could just be like, what's the word for pencil? It comes up with something that sounds nice. Like I don't need to like go check the dictionary if I don't remember the word for what pencil would be in the language that I'm basing it on. Okay, the pros of a posteriori is it can be based on a language that I like, and that kind of like sets me up to like the aesthetic of it. Although history says that's not always the case. Look at Albiska, it's like almost exactly Gothic, except I hate it with the new, you know, more regular grammar. I don't like the aesthetic anymore. But theoretically, that's possible. The same problem happened with it, and I was like, oh, it's Elder, and it's going to sound great, and I don't like how it sounds now. So, an actual pro of a posteriori is, like, vocab already exists. Like, in the language I bring it from. For the most part, you know, the source language might not have a word for dishwasher, but, like, I will find the building blocks to make into dishwasher. The con, of course, is I need there's more of a process to creating the words. Like the vocab exists, but I need to do something to it to make it be my conlangs vocab and not just exactly that language's vocabulary. And the other thing is, I guess the other pro is potentially easier to learn, like familiar. Like it's more familiar. If I choose a natural language that I'm familiar with, that'll make the vocab more familiar. It's the opposite of this con. And then the opposite of this pro, I guess, is like this con. And I guess the opposite of this pro is this con, which is that it's less unique to me. I'm trying to not have that be the case, but yeah, this is basically just an X. A posteriori. It's the other con. I literally had it in my brain just a second ago. Depending on how faithful I am, I could also be trapped. I could be stuck if I don't like the aesthetic. Like I have aesthetic boundaries. And I guess that is the corollary to more unique to me. Like the other thing with more unique to me is like more freedom. Like I have more freedom to do whatever I want. Now, I could do a sort of hybrid system where like the vocabulary is a priori, but the grammar is a posteriori. So like it can have the grammar I want, even if it's not in the language that I bring it from. But like I said before, that feels like, that gives me some weird cognitive dissonance. Like, okay, I have like Gothic words with like the way of creating past tenses, like the way you do it in a completely different language. That just doesn't, it feels weird to me. It feels like all these words are stranded on a desert island. Like, trying to survive on, like, what exists in that desert island. So, the question now is, which of these pros outweighs the cons? Because they're pretty balanced, I think. So, which of these pros outweighs the cons for the kind of conlang I need it to be, which is a mostly aesthetic emphasizing conlang that is useful and efficient for me to learn? That this is the struggle, because when I think about the effort it's going to take for me to learn a bunch of new a priori words that have no connection to a natural language, my brain kind of shuts down and I get overwhelmed the same way that having that long list of words I needed to have words for did. Because I'm also already learning another a priori conlang as we speak. There's another a priori language that I'm learning and plan on using for other things, but not for my journal. And so that on top of that feels like a lot. And I don't want to do that. Which is why leaning a posteriori words in terms of vocabulary. Another problem I've run into, though, is no natural languages have the distance alignment. I made it up. So getting a natural language to a point where it will have distance alignment, the only ways I can ever think to do it end up being very unaesthetic to me. Like very aesthetically unpleasing. So that's the flip side. So I get stuck there. And that's why I haven't made a journal language. Like, I haven't tried to make a journal language in quite some time because of this problem. I'm sitting here, like, I want it to have this very unique alignment that works well for how my brain works, and it feels aesthetic to me. But I'm not going to learn a ton of new, a priori, like, new roots that aren't related to any natural language that I speak or want to speak. You know, I'm just like, I'm not going to do that. So I'm kind of stuck. Because the aesthetic part of this, which should be the most important part we've identified, makes me think I should have as much creative and aesthetic freedom as I want or need. So a priori sounds like the way to go for that, right? Because it's like I have complete control of what words sound like. I can make them as soon as I want. I have no aesthetic boundaries. I can make it however I want, and it won't be like weird or conflict with natural language intuitions because it won't be related to any natural language. But then, like, am I going to learn the whole language? And I guess the thing I should tell myself is I will learn it if I like it enough and I want to use it enough. But there's just a big part of my brain that's like, I don't have the creative energy to do this and the other conlang, the other a priori conlang that I'm doing currently. That, yeah, it's just, it feels like a lot in my brain. And it feels so much that it makes me not even want to do a conlang. It puts me back in that headspace of like, you should be doing a natural language instead. It will be more useful for your life to do your journal in another conlang. But doing my journal in another natural language, I don't think it will be that useful in my life. What will be more useful for me with natural languages I want to learn is speaking it with people. My journal is not for that. There's no correlation. My brain needs to stop doing that to itself. But for my journal, what do we do? I hope this is entertaining for whoever's watching it. And I hope this is helpful for people if they're having a struggle too. If they want to make a conlang for their journal. Seeing someone else go through this might be cathartic, maybe. Who knows? But regardless, I think I need to be realistic about my time too. My time is valuable, and my journal is valuable. I use it to function in my life. And so if this is going to make using my journal more enjoyable and potentially even more consistent, like I will more consistently use my journal, which will be better for me. If having it be in a conlang helps, and I like the conlang enough, then it is worth the time, energy, and effort learning it for me, I think. It's just a question, I think, of how much effort will that take. How much effort will that take if it's a priori versus a posteriori? Because I don't think the process to word creation is a huge problem. I like doing it. It's a fun process. But it's also, it puts me in that weird uncanny valley. If it won't make me want to learn it. If it's like, Italian words with Germanic noun declension or something like that. It just won't, my brain won't like it. I don't think my brain would like it, at least. Yeah, okay. So, I enjoy conlanging. This is something I haven't really talked about today. That seems out of left field, like, duh. Clearly, I enjoy conlanging, I like doing this. But what I mean is, the process of making a conlang is fun to me. And I've also been having a very strong urge to make a conlang recently. Not a journaling specifically. Actually, I think in my head for weeks, it's not been, I'm like, I don't want this to be a journaling. I want to make like just a purely aesthetic, like just for fun conlang. But I feel like I should pour my creative juices that I have for that into this. And maybe even just do that and then not say it will be my journaling, but just make it my language that I'm making with an eye towards, I guess, like, being useful for my journal. So I want to do, I think I want to do an a posteriori language. I think that's what I want to do. I think I will enjoy it. And I think, like, the process of doing it will be fun regardless. Like, I've made a lot of a priori language or a posteriori languages and then didn't do anything with them, but the process of making it was fun, and I don't regret the time I spent doing it because it was fun. It's a fun activity, like playing a game of chess. When you're done with a game of chess, it's gone. Like, you're done with it, but it was fun doing it. That's kind of how making a lot of oppository languages is for me. There are some conlangs that I've made that were a posteriori that I thought, maybe this will become my journaling conlang. And then they didn't, because ultimately I liked the aesthetic of it on one hand, but I didn't like the idea of using it for my journal because of what I did with the vocabulary. But what I could be doing is do the process of making the language, but maybe doing some semantically unnaturalistic shifts. I could do some sound shifts that are, or some semantic shifts, changes in meaning that are not naturalistic, even though the sound processes are naturalistic and fun to do, so as to lend to the word ending up being a useful word for my journal. If that makes sense. Because I want the words to have a meaning that makes sense for the thing that's in my journal, but often I can't see it getting there without being like some weird compound. But I'm going to be doing some weird semantic things. But I think I will enjoy it. I think I will enjoy that process. So this could be a pro. Process to word creation could also be a pro because it's fun. Because again, aesthetic. I need to have fun making it and using it. I need to want to go into my journal. And if I'm going to get to do a fun thing to go into my journal, then good. Like, that's a good thing. However, the reason this is a con is because that does take time. I don't always have time to do the fun process. So I need to make it automizable, if that makes sense. Like, easily doable quickly. Automatable, maybe that's what I was looking for. Automatizable. I'm struggling with that word. Easy to do on the spot quickly. Yes. So I'm going to struggle a lot with this, with the aesthetic of. I'm probably going to struggle a lot with picking a source language and with making the process end up having a good aesthetic. I think I should work backwards. I've done this before with a friend when we did like a collaborative conlang. We started with what phonology we wanted it to end up with, like what sounds we wanted to end up being in the language. And then we made a proto-language that was very different, but went through a lot of processes to get it to that stage. I think I might do that, but I might have to. I'll do that, and then I'll pick a language that I can see getting to that stage diachronically. Automatable, automated, yeah. Thank you. Automatable, automated, yes. Thank you. And that's the idea. So I'll start with I'll go back to notes. I think I'm going to start with I wish there were a hotkey for merging cells. Google Sheets does not have a hotkey for merging cells, and it makes me want to scream. Okay, start with final, I guess, like goal phonology and morphology too, because like the morphology is important to me as well. And then I pick a language, a source language that has the benefits that I want from like the vocabulary, the familiarity, and then I might make it difficult to automate, but I think that will be the fun challenge. Because I do have trouble seeing any of, like, for example, the natural languages that I journal in, at least, getting anywhere close to the kind of morphology that I want and also still sound good to me. But that's the challenge. But at least it's a challenge. It's a challenging project. Like, it's a challenging conlang project, and not an impossible catch-22 that makes me not want to do this project at all, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think I'm leaning towards a posteriori. Where did that last I go? I did type the letter I. There we go. Okay. I think I have some ideas. And if I have time this week, which I doubt, I actually doubt I'm going to have time this week to do any of this, because there are so many ongoing things I have this week. Oh my goodness. But if I do have time this week, I'm going to try to pick my source language, or no, I'm going to try to make my goal phonology morphology like system that I want, and hopefully try to pick a source language that I'm going to use as my vocabulary source, that I will funnel through through changes to get to this point that I want aesthetically, because the aesthetic needs to be at the top of the priorities. Yeah, I think that's my plan. And so next week, next Saturday stream, next project stream, I think we will be doing a journal with me again. So you'll see inside my journal, you'll see me set up. Probably just next week. I'm going to do this coming week on my own, either today or tomorrow. But you'll see my journal again next week, like you did 2 weeks ago if you were here. And hopefully I will have made some kind of progress or decision on what I'm going to do with my journal language. So you can maybe see what that looks like. If not, either way there will be an update. Like, if I've made progress or not, I will talk about it. There's other things I do plan on talking about in my next journal with me. I have some, like, questions from people that I'm going to address, like, just different topics that have come up from, like, prior project streams or yesterlore or, you know, languagey, medieval history type questions that I want to talk about. So that is the goal. That's the plan for next Saturday. So I'm going to end the stream. Actually made it through the whole time without my computer giving out, which happened last week. Thank you, everyone who's been present. Thank you for those participated. Thank you for everyone watching in the future on YouTube if you're watching this. I know this was a very rambly video. It was inherently going to be one because it's me dealing with this personal issue of journal conlanging. But hopefully it was interesting. And maybe you can think about it for yourself if you wanted to journal in a conlang, or think about making a conlang for your journal. But yeah, I hope this was fun or interesting. And thank you, everyone, all my viewers, anyone in the future catching up on these in the year 20, whatever it is. Have fun watching me struggle with conlangs. So, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of whatever time zone you're in. Hopefully, I'll see some of you in yesterlore next week. Hopefully, we'll be getting towards the end of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, if not finishing it. And with that, farewell.